James, I think we can go ahead and get started.
All right, it's all yours.
Great, James. Thank you very much. Thank you to you and to the rest of the team for arranging the connection this morning. I'd like to welcome you out to the UETN board meeting on this beautiful morning. A special welcome to members of the board. Thank you all for joining. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here in person today, and it's nice. Appreciate any guests who are joining us this morning. Extend a welcome to you as well as members of the public, and then of course a special welcome to members of the UETN staff. Appreciate their hard work. So hope that you all are doing well. We have a full agenda this morning, so we'll get started first. Before we do some introductions, I'd like to get started with one quick action item, and that's approval of the minutes from the April 14th board meeting. They're in your materials. I hope you've had a chance to review them, and I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes from April 14th.
Motion to approve.
Patty, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Brittany. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, the minutes stand approved. Thank you very much. Now we're going to do one specific introduction. I'd like to introduce Elwood Downing, who is the consultant that the UETN board has engaged to dive into the role, the purpose, role, and functioning of the advisory council system that we have with our board. Patty and I had a chance to meet with Elwood last week, had a fantastic, just really meaningful discussion with him. I'd like to give Elwood an opportunity to introduce himself, perhaps share a bit of his background, and then talk about some of the questions that he is asking, and give the board, Elwood, if you could, just a brief summary of the work that you have been hired to do on behalf of the board.
Okay, certainly. Thank you very much, Chair Wagner. So my bio's in the agenda there as well. So, but I'm, as you know, I'm Elwood Downing, and I now reside in Wake Forest, North Carolina. I've actually worked a little over 23 years in the research and education space. Worked for Merit Network, which is hosted by the University of Michigan. So not identical to UETN, but I was actually a U of M employee, but worked for Merit Network, which is a separate 501c3 organization. The Michigan Research and Education Network, they don't receive any legislative funding or anything to operate there. I had enough years at the university to retire, but I'm not old enough to retire. So I'm now residing in Wake Forest, North Carolina. And in 2018 through July of last year, I've done some work for MCNC, which is the Research and Education Network here in North Carolina. And in particular, I worked with them on their advisory council, as well as some rebranding and their website and messaging and communication and things of that nature as well. And then I had the opportunity to meet with UETN and discuss the opportunity to work with the board and the two advisory councils, the Education Advisory Council, the Telehealth Advisory Council, and then also the Technology Advisory Committee I have met with all the chairs except for one, and that was supposed to be this week, so it's rescheduled for next week due to scheduling conflicts with the schedule. And then I've also had the opportunity to watch some of your meetings via video, as well as attend the meetings in person as well. So as you know, this is my first meeting with the board here. So my next steps is to get a survey and a questionnaire out to the councils to kind of understand a little bit more how we can strengthen the engagement between the board and the advisory councils. As you know, in the legislature code and so forth, that the two key pillars to UETN is these two advisory councils. And so the one I'm looking at is ways in which we can strengthen that, as well as look at a little bit of governance as well. I've been doing some work as well for CETA with their board as well on some governance and things of this nature as well. So my next step next week and the following week, I'll be putting together a survey for the board as well. And I really would like your input through this process. If you don't have the time to complete the survey, and it would be easier for you to have a 15-minute conversation with me, I would be open to that as well. So, so I'd like to give you multiple ways to be a part of this process. And then as part of that, I'm also kind of reviewing some of the, your policies and things of this nature. And then I'll come back with a recap of some of the input that I received, as well as recommendations. As of right now, I believe that I'm planning to attend your retreat in September. And I'll continue to be working with each of these 4 groups between now and the end to mid September, where I'll be putting together some of my recommendations for the board in particular. So that's a little bit of a summary of what I think that that I'm doing, and I think I've summarized it pretty good. But I'll defer to Chair Wagner and Vice Chair Norman, and also Spencer, if there's anything that I left out that you would like me to communicate to the board.
Elwood, thank you very much. I'm going to go to Patty. She was a part of the engagement in this RFP, Elwood, and working with you. Patty, your the thoughts.
Yes, I just wanted to thank Elwood. In our first conversation, Robert and I, in speaking with him, just the level of expertise that he has. The question he asked even, and Robert, I don't know if you felt this way, had me even considering things like, well, I hadn't thought about that. And maybe, and it just helped us to dig deeper into ourselves to be able to say, what is it that we really want? And so that was super helpful to kind of create those guardrails of like, this is it, and but not this, and but maybe this. And so just really appreciate the expertise that Elwood will bring.
Yeah, thank you. I felt the same. A very insightful discussion and the questions that he asked, to the point that we were going to have a discussion today as a board about the strategic planning retreat. We put a pause on that discussion because, frankly, Elwood's going to play, I believe, a really critical role in our strategic retreat in September. A lot of what he's doing, the questions that he's asking, might be journeying a bit outside of and sort of surrounding the advisory council discussion. There are some larger questions too that, just because of his experience and his understanding and insight into boards, in particular this area, I got a sense meeting with him that there are some larger questions too that we could really rely upon his expertise. So as a board, we may, between now and September, we may communicate and will about the retreat, but know that our thinking is that Elwood will play a really primary role in that retreat, and we'll be spending time during the retreat looking at not only the purpose and function of the advisory councils, but the board itself and our role as members of the board, how we engage with the UETN team, how we can become more engaged as a board. We have those types of discussions too. So really excited about the retreat and the things that Elwood is inspiring as he's asking great questions. I'll pause and Elwood, any final thoughts that you might have that you'd like to share?
I don't know at this point. I mean, I like to, I'm still putting the pieces of the puzzle together. I've, UETN is a little complex, so to speak, and you folks are really beginning to try to gel and mature, bringing the telehealth and the education in on the network, and then having one board that oversees that as well. So I'd like to continue to do my discovery and not go into some of my thoughts right now until I've had an opportunity to really kind of put them together. But I would be, if there's time, if anyone has any specific questions for me, I'm willing to take them as well if there is time, because I want this to be a conversation because it's together that we're going to do something. So.
Great. Well, thank you. I would encourage members of the board to, as Elwood extended the invitation, if you feel that the survey, if you have more to share, please reach out to him directly and share. I think that could help him, and ultimately I feel like it will help the board in what we're trying to accomplish through this process. So really want to hear and engage with you and get your honest and open feedback. So please, but before we move on, any questions about Elwood, about the consulting, the process that we are going through? Patty?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if we could, I put it in the, oh, there it is. Thank you, Elwood. You already did it, sending out his email address, the contact information. And Elwood, would you like us to have something in the title so that you know that it's specifically for UETN? Is there something that will, naming convention?
UETN, and then whatever you want, or UETN input or something like that would be good. I keep my inbox pretty clean, so I'll be able to catch everything. I'll also put my phone number in. I was just typing it as well, so if anybody wants to give me a call as well. I know sometimes it's easier to have a conversation perhaps while you're doing something else on the road or whatever. I'll entertain any way to have a conversation and discussion with you, because this is important.
Great. Thank you. Any questions or comments before we move on? Okay, we will move on. Elwood, thank you very much for that important work. We are now going to move to our action agenda items. One of the most important roles that we have as a board is the fiscal responsibility, the accountability that we have as a board, the accountability that we hold with the UETN organization. So this morning, very important action item, and that's an approval of the FY24 budget. We have here today, we have Andrew, and I'm going to ask Spencer if he would introduce Andrew, please.
Yeah, just real quickly, Andrew Keddington started in January.
Yeah.
Replaced Sherilyn Stevens, who retired. Andrew comes from Salt Lake County. He's been phenomenal to work with. He's jumped right in. He's already helped us adjust a few processes and things, and it's been good as we've jumped into this year's budget process. And so he's here. Lisa is on the road today, and so we've got Andrew in her place. But anything else you want to add to, but in terms of introduction?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity and thankful for this chance. Great time to start to really jump into the budget, and been a great learning process for me as we've gone through this. But yeah, happy to entertain any questions as it relates to the budgets.
Great. Anything specific that either of you would draw our attention to before we open up to any questions the board might have?
If I can just do two things, and then you may be able to fill in some blanks, Andrew.
Absolutely.
The first one, on the first sheet, it shows the revenues for our budget, or our income, if you will. There are two items I just want to draw your attention to. First is near the top, the ARPA, the $19.3 million. Hopefully you'll recall as a board, this is money we're still waiting on from US Treasury. We've got a meeting, I think, next week or the week after with the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget to see if there's any updates there. It sounds like there may be something this summer, but that was legislatively approved in the 2022 legislative session. So just that's that background. It's still sitting there on our books. The other thing I just want to make note of is, let's see, the near the bottom, at the very bottom, that bottom section, UETN carry forward balance. Just, I think it's important to put context in that dollar amount. That amount acts as a sort of bridge loan as we do our E-rate process. Historically, before COVID, the turnaround period from when we apply for E-rate funds to the time that they actually come or they're actually funded was around 6 months. That's now stretching out to about 2 years. And so in order for us to maintain continuity of connections and services, there's those funds that sort of act as a bridge loan in the short term. As that, hopefully that window will start to shorten. We're dependent on the FCC and their subcontractor to do that. Then those funds will diminish. So that's, I think, an important thing to note in terms of our carry forward balance. It's a large chunk of that is to act as sort of a bridge loan. But Andrew, anything else you want to highlight in terms of the major parts of our budget?
The one thing I will notate between what was presented at the last board meeting and this board meeting, we had one minor word change, and that was just to identify the different stages of the budget. So that very last column, you'll see FY24 total budget. The last board meeting, it had requested budget, but we just put that total in there just so we can identify this stage and relevancy of what budget stage we're in. As far as from the income standpoint, I do think like Spencer, did a great job of explaining our kind of our cash flows within UETN and the importance of that carry forward balance of really allowing that opportunity to fund the organization until we see those USAC revenues come in. From that, we'll highlight from the state appropriation. We did get 4 new funding sources or 4 increases in state appropriation funding. It was $923,000 in compensation, $180,000 for telehealth, and $570K for our interactive video conferencing. And then we got 2 new positions, 2 new FTEs for some specialized engineering positions that equated to $400,000. So we saw that increase from that state appropriation. From that, our grant revenue is our other primary source of revenues that come in, and that has been very static, if you will, of prior years. Of the majority of that grant is the CPB grant that we get, and that funding source has been very stable and static from prior years as well. So.
Thank you. So before I call for a motion, any discussion or specific questions that board members have? Abby, you have your hand. Please.
Yes, it's always me. Sorry. I looked over this budget previously, and I was just wondering if I could just maybe have a couple of sentences on what the stakeholder recovery is through telehealth. I'd just be interested to hear what that is. I didn't know if it was something through the ARPA or ESSER or any of those. Just an interest, really, if someone could give a couple sentences.
Sure. Just real quickly, it's basically a chargeback that for some of the connections on the telehealth side, we actually charge them for that connection.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so my question is, I know that at UVU, we've had a lot of conversation about the changes with the legislature in terms of accountability for carry forward. Does that apply for UETN as well? In terms of the percentage that can be carried forward and how you articulate how it's going to be spent in the future?
There's probably two parts that don't answer the question very well. Yes, on the one hand, but on the other hand, that might be also appropriation subcommittee specific. There might be some things from the higher education subcommittee around carry forward balance that higher education's been instructed on that has not come down through our committee.
Okay.
I did notice we do have Yvonne Jumbo on the line. Maybe he's the legislative analyst or fiscal analyst for UETN. Maybe he has a more informed answer from the legislative branch chair. If you want to hear from it.
Sure.
Yvonne, don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you have any insights there on carry forward balances, if there's sort of a standard that statewide everyone's adhering to or not, Yvonne, feel free to chime in if.
Yeah, so this is Yvonne with the Legislative Fiscal Analyst Office. There is no standard statewide that I'm aware of. What is the goal is to have the opportunity for you to carry amounts of money that you need for the operations. So we avoid this use it or lose it mentality that was in the state government in the past. Last session, I think it was Representative Ballard that passed the bill. I think it's House Bill 322 that requires each agency to come, I think it's through the accountable review process, but to explain what the amount is that they have requested as non-lapsing and what is the purpose of it. And so that's really the only thing for you to explain what you're saving up for. And then the legislature will, in some cases, maybe pay for that if you're building a reserve to buy maybe a new system that maybe computers or something like that. They might decide, hey, let's fund that. It's necessary, fund it up right now, or okay to carry forward the amount and build over time, or no, you don't really need that much money and you need to spend it within certain amount of time. That's kind of what I know about the non-lapsing balance directions.
Great, thank you. Yeah, 322, I think is what I was referring to. So thank you, that's helpful.
And just a quick additional comment there, Christina. At least last year, we did provide an accounting of what we had planned to use our non-lapsing balance fund for.
Yep, and that was great. I appreciate you providing that details.
Yeah. Thanks, Yvonne.
Yep, thank you for that explanation. Patty.
Sorry, there was another question on my notes. If we go to the second page and we look at the multi-year contracts, the multi-year software contracts, is that the same as the consortium contracts that we'll be discussing later on in our agenda today? Is that similar to some of those items that is within the consortium contracts? Oh, yeah, I see Laura saying yes, so thank you.
Yes.
One thing that would be helpful, and I don't know if this is too much or if it's just me or not, but to be able to say like the sources of the budgets. So as we're going through here, for example, the last one that we were on, it's a charging, like UETN charges someone and then it comes back, and then maybe one is a because of statute, or maybe one is a federal grant that comes in or whatnot. It'd be nice just to know the source of the income as it comes in, as we're looking at this. Sorry, I always ask for more, it's like you bring the perfect thing and then I just want one more, sprinkle on the cake. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. This is great feedback and can certainly provide that. So.
Okay, good. Other questions? And I'm not seeing everybody's tiles, so if you have one, just go ahead. Feel free to jump into at any time. So hearing no questions, I would welcome a motion to approve the FY24 budget.
So
Motion.
Okay, we'll take Patty with that motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Christina. Any further discussion about the FY24 budget? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And any in opposition? Okay, the motion carries and the FY24 budget is approved. I would just add that one of the things that we have been talking about that we will most likely be bringing up in the strategic retreat is forming a separate finance committee with members of the board to regularly dive deeper into the budget itself. So at the strategic planning retreat, that's one of the things that I expect that we will be talking about. So when we have a discussion in an action item like this, it will, in addition to members of the finance team, we'll also hear from our own member committee and what their recommendations are related to the budget as well. So that just gives you a glimpse of some of the things that we'll be talking about in September for the retreat. Okay, we'll move on to the next action item. The board will take action on a new member of the Telehealth Advisory Council who has been recommended to serve, and we need to vote on that membership. I believe Matt is on the call. Matt, would you like to introduce the individual that's being proposed?
Yes, thank you, Chair Wagner. I'd be happy to. So Eric Tadahara is being proposed to join the Telehealth Advisory Council. He works at the Department of Health and Human Services. He's been involved in school-based telehealth and behavioral health counseling for adolescents for a long time, and he's just a great advocate for telehealth in the state of Utah. He'll be filling an at-large position that is vacated by Brittany Lee, who is also at the Department of Health and Human Services. So we're happy to have representation from that agency. The advisory council met last week and passed a motion to recommend him to the board. So
great, thank you, Matt. I would entertain a motion to accept this membership.
So moved.
Thank you, Tad. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jason. Any discussion? Oh, Patty?
Matt, great choice. Worked with Eric for a long time, and he just a phenomenal choice. And I know that our education folks on here will say that as well. He just a great choice, great advocate for kids and services. So
thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand. And any opposed? Thank you. The motion passes and we welcome him to the Telehealth Advisory Council. Now move on to our next item, 2.3, resolution for electronic meetings. This is a renewal, if you will, of a resolution that as a board we approved in 2021. It gives us an opportunity to renew and say that we still believe in this and in the idea of in the ability that we have to hold our meetings electronically. I'd like to give Laura a chance if she has anything to add. I hope that members of the board have reviewed the resolution, but Laura, things that you would like to add?
Thank you. No, it's exactly as you said. It's a renewal. Just shows that the board continues to make active decisions and keeping it current.
I think the thing that I appreciate about the resolution too is that it's brief and it's to the point and it's very direct. So I would entertain a motion to renew this resolution, the electronic meeting resolution.
So moved.
Thank you, Patty. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. I didn't quite catch who that was. It's Taryn. Okay, great. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. And any opposed? Thank you. The motion passes, and that takes care of our action items for our meeting this morning. We'll now move on to our discussion items, and we're going to start 3.1 with discussion on the UETN connection policy, and Spencer is going to lead this discussion.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And in the spirit of brevity, this is, I think, the opposite of what we just discussed. The connection policy, it's a fairly heavy policy. It's essentially the primary policy that defines in general terms how our stakeholders connect to the network. And so that's, as we noted in the last board meeting, that we're working on a revision of that policy. As we've jumped into that revision, we found it is very complex. And I think the main takeaway here is that it isn't ready for the board. We hope to have it ready for the September meeting and to get a draft to you before that so you can review it. So it's not just you're coming cold to this as a board. This policy does affect the terms by which stakeholders connect. It defines timelines. It defines on a technical side, it defines how we interact with the E-rate program at the federal level. So it's a fairly heavy policy. And so we're actually looking at possibly even breaking it out to be more than one policy because of how much is covered within that policy. So I'll stop there. Certainly, if there's someone else that wants to add anything, Michael from the procurement side or Jim from the technical and network side or anybody else from staff, is there anything else you'd want to add that I missed?
Nothing for me, Spencer. Thank you for the help.
So
for me, Spencer, I think it's good that we're taking a few minutes to review this before we get it before the board. So I really support this direction. Thank you.
So Spencer, we've had the connection policy. What are the goals? What are you and the team, what are you hoping to do? You had talked about that it's large, it encompasses a lot. You even talked about perhaps not dismantling it, but splitting it up into perhaps different policies. What really is the ultimate goal in taking the time to look at this? What are you hoping to accomplish?
So there's a pretty well-established tension in, as we do our process each year from an E-rate perspective to identify either by contract or by need what our stakeholders are needing on the education side. And it does affect telehealth to a degree as well. But getting the information we need and interacting with our schools and other libraries and others saying, okay, this is the equipment we need to do. How does this line up with the E-rate cycle that we have to adhere to? And also ensuring that we also have the equipment capabilities to make delivery of those connections. So it touches on a lot of operational aspects of UETN, and it's really sort of the bread and butter core of what UETN does in terms of networking. It's contracting. So we'll identify the need, identify the equipment that is associated with it, then turn around and go solicit proposals from vendors to make those connections, and then do everything, package that up, submit it to the E-rate or to USAC, and then establish an MOU with the schools based on all of that activity that's been done. So a 3 to 5 year agreement. That's an annual cycle that is done every year that involves a lot of people. And it also involves a lot of federal and state requirements around either procurement, the E-rate program. And so what we're wondering is if it might make it a little bit easier with all these moving parts to move them into multiple policies, so that when there are changes, we don't have to change one big, huge, thorny policy. That's really the heart of it. The attempt, I think, at this revision was to put a little more definition around the expectations we set with our stakeholders, to make sure we're clear, but also balance that with, we also want to be a service to them. So we don't want to be overly punitive if stakeholders aren't meeting the requirements of our policy. So it is a balance that we have to make sure we strike as well. And that's actually where the real rub right now is, if you will, that we're trying to figure out what is the right balance in policy so that operationally we can carry out what we're essentially obligated to do, but not do it in an overly arbitrary way that our stakeholders in schools feel like we're not accounting for what their needs are in a timely way.
Thank you. Will the advisory councils have a chance to weigh in?
I think this would be a good one to put towards the Technology Advisory Council, but we haven't had that conversation as staff. But I think it would be good to have a committee vet it that has some stakeholder voice there.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, if other members of the board, if you feel otherwise, please jump in. But I think this would be a great role for our advisory committees. See a hand raised, Rick.
Yes, thank you. Is just for my memory to clarify some things. Is this the policy that we spent a lot of time working on a few years back in multiple meetings to put together? And because I think that would be helpful. If so, then I think this, if I remember right, we had a lot of the members of the advisory councils that were involved in those, and so I think it would be good to have their continued involvement and look at this.
I believe that's the case, having not been here, but this undergone a significant revision in 2019, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. That's
So
correct.
I'm going to jump in. I'd like to ask that the team consult with the advisory councils with this. I'd love for them to be engaged if there's whichever advisory councils would be most applicable, but let's get their input, feedback. I think it would be good for the board to know that the advisory councils have really reviewed these as well. We've got a hand up from David.
Yeah, just I really appreciate the direction this conversation's going and what's been brought up. Just referring back to Spencer's comments, just some clarification. Is there some concern on how services are being provided and when they're being provided right now by UETN?
No, to be honest, it's a little more of the internal side of operationally making sure all of our different functions are comfortable with what we've drafted. So to be honest, I'm not trying to downplay. I think it would be very helpful to have the advisory councils weigh in on this, but a lot of it is operationally making sure we're all on the same page with what the impact of this policy could be. So to answer your question quickly, David, no, not specifically, no.
Okay. I just know as we get into policy, sometimes we have some unintended consequences when we put some things out. So, well, I appreciate you bringing this up now, so we've got some time to look at it.
Great. Other questions, discussion? Okay, well, I think the board has given some clear direction. It sounds like a very healthy exercise and thing to do. So thank you for Spencer, for you and the team taking this on. We're going to move to our next discussion item, and this is cybersecurity. Spencer, you'll be leading this with perhaps other members of the team.
Yes, and anticipating a fair amount of discussion here. To try and paint the backdrop, in the last year, the state has established the Utah Cyber Center at the Department of Public Safety, supported by the Department of Technology Services. As part of the Cyber Center, there's a Cybersecurity Commission, of which we're a member, as well as Steve Hess on behalf of higher education. And there may be some public ed folks as part of that as well. There was, so that legislation that was passed last session that established the center puts in place some responsibilities for that center around the response and mitigation to cyber attacks for all government entities, including cities, towns, counties, and education. That's been a little bit of a prompt for us to think, what should our role be in relation to the Utah Cyber Center? To add to that, there was a recent legislative audit published last month regarding, at a very general level, the how cybersecurity is being covered by all government entities. I think the general takeaway is that there are a lot of weaknesses throughout the entire government enterprise, if you will. That's background. UETN for a number of years has provided cybersecurity services, both, of course, for purposes of keeping the network secure, as we maintain all of the traffic for all education entities that connect to the network. But also added to that, we do on the telehealth side, we actually have a managed service that's associated with the network connection there, as well as assessment and consulting services we've done on a more ad hoc basis. Just in the last few years, I think we've done 20 or 25 assessments for schools and others around cybersecurity. That all is background to what this proposal is putting out there. We feel like in conversations with Steve Hess with the CIOs and in some conversations with the technology directors in a limited way, that UETN is in a position to be a more explicit cybersecurity service to education on behalf of the state. Now, I want to make sure to be very clear, that doesn't mean we're going to be in the business of requiring certain tools or certain protocols at the local level. There's still local control, local governance. We don't want to get in the way of that. But there's also a connection point, literally and figuratively, with our network. That is, a school connects to UETN's network. There are certain standards we require that they adhere to follow our security policies as it pertains to the network. By that very nature of what we do on the network, we're very aware of the security threats and compromises that our stakeholders experience. In fact, we step in quite often to help assist them when they're dealing with compromises and other attacks. We interface very closely with all of the other cybersecurity entities in the state because of what we see in our network in terms of threats and traffic, and at a national level. In fact, we have DoD clearance, at least our security folks do, on a lot of the threats they're seeing nationwide. What we're proposing here is essentially what will become a legislative proposal. We haven't explored what the exact details of the funding and the statutory components would be, but it's contemplating something that would basically, we would facilitate as a education security center for higher and public education. And it would be a way in which to identify how we can combine resources or provide something at an enterprise level at a lower cost, similar to how we would do things either with software and what we've done with the network over the years, but it's specific to the cybersecurity area. That last page outlines some possible areas. It's not something we've set in stone, but it's meant to kind of get this conversation into a little more concrete in preparation for the legislative session. But so far, based on the conversations, it feels like these are places in which a cybersecurity or an education security center could facilitate some things. So for example, workforce training. We've been approached by a few universities who do cybersecurity training, where they might maintain what's called a test range or a sandbox, if you will, in which their students can go and hack away, if you will, in security. They've asked for that ability to do that across multiple institutions. And of course, UETN being the network connector to those institutions, it would make some sense to be able to facilitate that capability between those cybersecurity programs. That's just one example. Policy development. There are cybersecurity standards that are industry accepted. We could be a facilitator to make sure, whether it's a school district or a university or anywhere in between, that we can be a facilitating entity to make sure standards are well recognized. So I guess I could stop there. I would maybe ask if it's okay, Chair, for Steve Hess to maybe a comment. We've had a number of conversations about what this could look like to make it be a strong partnership and to not be something that's overly prescriptive, and to be facilitating and be a service add, similar to what we do and everything else we do. We don't want to get into the mandating business as an organization. So Steve, I'll stop there. Any additional comment?
Yeah, sorry, I've been out of town, Spencer, and I couldn't get back to you until today. And just a couple of things. First of all, the University of Utah, because of its hospital and clinics, has quite an investment in cybersecurity already, and that's tried to reach out to the institutions of higher education to kind of share some of that expertise and work through the board of Utah State Board of Higher Education to pass policies that we are accountable for. And Spencer and I have talked about how we could extend that further even to K through 12 and work together to have a better plan and policy and tools that could be standardized across the system of higher education. Because I'm on the Cybersecurity Commission of the governor as well, and the broad coverage that they have in that particular commission is so broad, including counties, cities, state government. And as we've been in those meetings, we've found that education is quite a bit further ahead in cybersecurity than even some elements of state government, and certainly greater than county and city governments. So we're just trying to think, is there some way we work together, particularly going to the legislature for funding and maybe some standardized processes that we could work together better to secure the state as a whole, particularly in education. We'd have to pass that by the commission as well, but having a plan from this board and having the board approve that plan, I think would be helpful in bringing that forward. I think what we need to Spencer on this is that I think the CIOs need to look at this, and also the tech colleges to take a look at what's being proposed here. And since they're way down the road already on cybersecurity issues, and see how that could be better put together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we do not want to reinvent the wheel, and it's, I think, more in a spirit of shared services what we're where we're approaching this.
Because the commissioners come to us and said, you know, you ought to work with the Utah Education Network. They seem to have a greater success with the legislature. And if we came together, then we could share expertise of what we know in cybersecurity. And of course, you could share what you know about it, and be stronger for it in representing better plans for cybersecurity overall. And they would be, okay, what common tools could we use? What are the common policies and standards we're going to follow? What will we do if we have a breach? How can we to accommodate that? And again, how would we work with the State Commission on Cybersecurity? There are just a number of questions, and I think what you've outlined here is a good start, but I think in our retreat with the CIOs, I'd like to take this forward and have their input, and then bring it back to a board meeting later on and see what, so that we can get their full input on what they think the forward path ought to be.
So we have some, thank you, Steve. We have some hands up. Let's go to Patty first and then Jason.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the request that we had last year. I think it was 18 or 19 million for cybersecurity for higher education. Is that correct?
That's right.
And then what are some of the major differences besides the passing of SB 127 in the requests? Is it one would just be specifically for higher education, and then this is more of a collaboration or consortium that's across the state? I just know that it didn't get funded last year, and what that difference might be.
It didn't get funded, and I think nobody knows why it didn't get funded. It just got lost, and nothing, as I understand, in the commissioner's office was funded that they requested, including cybersecurity. So we found that maybe the best hearing that we have at the legislature was working through the Utah Education Network. And the commissioner kind of encouraged us to do that. So we're just looking for a way to do that. And essentially what happened in higher ed is there was money that was allocated back to the universities and colleges. And we were told you need to go to your presidents to get cybersecurity funding, but I think most would agree, at least the CIOs we talked to, that didn't work very well. So we were disappointed not being able to get the money to get the tools that we wanted to work together on to better secure campuses.
May I have a follow-up?
Oh, please, yes.
Yeah,
Sorry.
on this cybersecurity task force, I think that's at this cybersecurity center, who's the K-12 representation on that?
You know, I don't know off the top of my head, Steve. I don't know if
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we could maybe find out who that is, just making sure there is representation. It's totally different how it looks in K-12 than it does in higher education. And so I just want to, I don't know if someone who's on that maybe can follow up and see who that K-12 rep is, and making sure, I guess my concern is making sure we do have representation on it.
I think that would be good. See, the Cybersecurity Commission was kind of, that may have been at least what we found out from the people I've talked to in the legislature, that they were kind of waiting on the Cybersecurity Commission, how that's going to be organized since the governor put that together to see how funding might roll forward. But the first request they had was to go for federal funds for 13 million, which wouldn't even scratch the surface on the overall cybersecurity issue we have for the state.
And Patty, if I may, just in response to your comment as well, that I think you're right. The environment in public ed is a lot different, but your technology folks, they meet often with our technology folks who meet with the higher ed technology folks, and they see very similarly the same threats. And there are a lot of opportunities to share resources to address similar threats, but in a local contextual way. That just doesn't seem to be happening at this point. And this is what we're trying to establish more formally.
Thank you.
Okay. Jason.
Yes, this is a very complex issue. And I know that as we have worked with our districts in the Q's region and with UETN, the language is really typically the catalyst that drives the work that we do. We've been moving to that CIS 20 and doing all of our policies based off of that work. But I do think that with the commission, there's experts across the state that if we came together and started working, this would be a good push forward. We already have a lot of work that we've done with Troy Jessup and his team at UETN. I don't think that maybe redoing some, or creating something new. Let's just start adding and bringing people in and expanding that role that we have with UETN already, and doing that work that way.
Thank you, Jason. So I have a question, Spencer and Steve. Perhaps you can answer this too. One of the concerns that I have is, okay, we have the Utah Cyber Center, we have the commission. Now we would have the Education Cybersecurity Center. How do we maintain our lanes? For example, I'm picturing the legislative session. I'm picturing the Utah Cyber Center asking for funds, the Education Cybersecurity Center asking for funds, maybe the commission weighing in on funds. How do you keep it so we all get funds, or, well, no one, because there's confusion? How do we keep these centers in their lanes, understanding? And Steve, I appreciate the fact that the Utah Cyber Center is very, very broad. And I appreciate the fact that maybe educational needs in the state are not going to be addressed. But at the same time, if we have two centers, it's sort of staying within the lanes and making sure that both centers are not diluting each other or detracting from each other, nor are we creating confusion with legislators or with the estate. So it's kind of a tough question to ask, but a bit of a devil's advocate question here.
So just a kind of a follow-up, If on the Hill last year, it's cities and towns and county governments that they're mainly focused about.
Yep.
And I'll let Dave talk because he's probably going to jump in on this too. But just as I sat there, the priority was cities and towns and county government
Right.
with that center, and higher ed and K-12 were an afterthought.
Right. And you'll see similarly in the audit, it essentially treats it the same way. And the way I interpret that is, I believe if we don't formalize a cybersecurity effort for education, it will be diluted into a broader statewide effort that really doesn't address our cybersecurity needs.
But will it be the intention for the Education Cybersecurity Center? The center will be going after funds. We'll be making requests.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the intent also would be to do it in close partnership with the Cybersecurity Commission of the state. Candidly, we haven't had these conversations, but I believe they may appreciate alleviating a really big part of state and local government of education being done by an existing set of resources that are further down the road than they are, frankly, when it comes to cybersecurity strategy and policy at the state level.
I see that David has his hand up.
Yeah, what Jason said is very true. Paul, what you're concerned about is a huge concern on how the funding's going to come. And what Spencer's talking about, it all fits. I was one of 2 school districts, Beaver and Washington County, participated with the State Cybersecurity Commission in their cybersecurity study of government entities this year. And that was going through the NIST cybersecurity protocol and having the Gartner Institute work with us on that. That was very informative to us, but it told me again that we're, like Steve says, way ahead on this than most other organizations, cities and towns and county commissions and others are struggling with these issues. And I think that's what the Cybersecurity Commission was formed for. I don't know that we need to give a different name to it, but UETN needs to maintain their role in cybersecurity and advocate for K-12 and for higher ed on its own, and ask for funding that comes into that lane. Because while we need to be aware of what the State Cybersecurity Commission's doing and partnering with them as much as we can, I think we have a lot more expertise in play already than other institutions.
I appreciate that. I guess I just want to make sure that the creation of another center is not going to come back to hurt us or to detract with what we're trying to do too, because I believe what's been said, and I appreciate the focus that we need to have on the education side. I guess I'm just wanting to make sure that another center is not going to hurt that effort.
No, I think you're right. We need to, Spencer and I need to go forward and talk to the commission about what we're thinking and to kind of get their input. But I need the thinking also of the CIOs and the technical colleges to see what their thoughts are about this as well, to make sure that they have plenty of input into the process. The University of Utah is, approaching 40,000 employees now. And partly that's because of the hospital clinics. We're building a new hospital out in West Valley. I think you know that. Adding clinics, and we have 36 new building projects going on right now. And because of that, we've had to be far ahead in cybersecurity, just to make sure that we protect the colleges, their research, and also the clinics and the hospitals, which have a very high standard for cybersecurity that we need to adhere to as well. So we're willing to pitch in and to give expertise and to help out, but I think everybody has that kind of has some kind of obligation to cybersecurity they need to work through, make sure their needs are taken care of. But I think as far as standardizing on tools and plans and funding and having some kind of overall plan that we could take to the legislature would strengthen all of us. But there would have to be the understanding that we still, in our own way, need to make sure we protect our own assets in the ways we need to.
Thank you, Steve. I see that Brittany has a hand.
Just a quick question on the organization of this center. Is the intent of this proposal that it would, you would seek legislation to formally organize this under UETN, or is it this would be organized as a function under UETN and then you'd seek funding as a line item to fund it? So just curious.
It's a great question, and we're entertaining any options that make sense. I hope the idea of an education security center doesn't become too much of a lightning rod. I guess to hopefully try and better articulate what we're contemplating, to David's point where Superintendent Long, where he's essentially charging UETN to go and seek resources on behalf of education for cybersecurity. Last year, when we made that request, that was on behalf of higher education. I think some context there is important. And Steve, tell me if I'm misspeaking, but that was the latest iteration in the CIOs attempting to get some resources for cybersecurity over several years, where the governing board for higher education has not prioritized that in a way that funding has come through. To me, that's indicative of where it's very challenging to get funding and resources for cybersecurity, for education in general. We feel like this would be a way in which it could, through UETN and its mission related to technology and network connectivity in support of education, that's a place where cybersecurity and its resources in relation to the legislature seem to make sense.
Quick follow-up on that.
Please.
Okay, sorry. So are you saying that I'm asking about the organization of the proposed center? Would you have to seek legislation in order to organize it officially, or are you trying to organize it just as a function of UETN and then use it as a vehicle to request funding or services from the legislature?
So right now, we're open to whatever option makes the most sense for our stakeholders.
Okay.
You know, if we get to the end of the summer or into the fall, and stakeholders like CIOs and education leadership across the enterprise are saying, yes, there should be a formalized center that statutorily defines this, then, you know, and we'd obviously want the board's support on that, but it might not be that.
Sorry, one more quick question. Does UETN need legislative permission to expand the scope of the services that they provide?
Not as you read it now. The statute for UETN is fairly broad. This should be included in the services we provide for technology and for network connectivity. However, just to put a context on that, we've never gone to the state before to request something specific for cybersecurity.
And just one last follow-up from me. Superintendents and others in those executive positions are very undereducated in cybersecurity for the most part. What we know about it is usually involving the insurance policy we fill out every year. And beyond that, we don't give it a lot of thought. And it's concerning to me with the increased threats that are out there that we're not doing something to better educate those in charge of the budgets.
Let me follow up that with David. I just got back from the Gartner cybersecurity meeting in Washington, D.C. the first part of the week. And if we're not concerned about it, you need to know that the threat of attack surface, we're trying to find private information and trying to extract that for ransoms is out of control in this country. And the reliance upon the internet and upon IT in everything we do, from our bank accounts to running our utilities to conducting business and corresponding, is under threat. And trying to pull together what needs to be done in order to mitigate that threat is, should be a top issue. But it's been difficult to get that on the agenda of the legislature in a way that they're willing to really step up and to fund it. And the cybersecurity center that they put together, I think with the governor, is kind of a first attempt. But several institutions in the state are far ahead of that. And there's not been a recognition of that in the leadership. So pulling together what UETN done, the universities have done, and some of the districts have done to get that better awareness, working with the Cybersecurity Commission, I think is the direction we need to take. And again, Spencer, it seems to me that you and I probably ought to go talk to the Cybersecurity Commission folks and chat about this proposal even before we take it much further. If the board agrees with that.
See a hand from Patty.
Yes, one other thing, and this was a part of a different discussion that Laura and Spencer and I were having. As we look at the statute, which I'll put in the chat box. One of the things we might need to be looking at, and this was going to be later on in the discussion, is what the role of UETN is. And as we look at the role of UETN statutorily, there's two different areas. If we go to subsection 2F, it does say on there, apply for state and federal funding on behalf of public and higher ed and telehealth services. And then it goes down and it says, 3A, provide services to schools, districts, avoid duplication of effort, those types of things. But nowhere in the statute does it say when. So, for example, later on in the conversation, if we're talking about consortium funding or, K-12 licenses, does that fall under apply for state and federal funding on behalf of, Roman numerals 1 and 2? Does going in together on cybersecurity and trying to find some of these services collectively, does that go through here? Or is that something that each time we bring to the board and then the board decides this would be something that we would all collectively agree on, that UETN at this point goes and moves forward and asks for additional funding from whichever entity, whether it's the grant, whether it's federal, whether it's state. And that kind of speaks to, Brittany, your question is, do we need legislative funding? Is this something that we need to change the statute for? As long as the statute remains broad like this, it does imply UETN shall apply for state and federal funding on behalf of and those entities. And so if we want to put any guardrails around that or not moving forward, that would be something for the board to discuss.
Thank you, Patty. Other questions, discussion, or feedback for the team? Again, this is not an action item, so I think it's a point of discussion, but I think there's been some fantastic points raised and information shared. And other thoughts?
Don't just, we have a serious problem. We need to face it in a unified way. I guess that's the best way to say it. And if we don't, one day when you find out your paycheck has been deposited somewhere in Eastern Europe, maybe that'll get people's attention. We had a fairly serious breach at one of our colleges, and it was one of the most painful experiences of my tenure here at the University of Utah. And we need to step up and work together to make sure that we take care of the things that we need to in the data that we have, because if we don't, it will come back to us in a major way, and it will not be pleasant.
Thank you, Steve. Spencer, do you feel like you've received some?
This is
good. So what would you see then to just clarify and summarize next steps?
So this is very helpful. This is meant to be a conversation piece, this document. It's nothing is set in stone. I think Steve articulated there's some groups we need to go talk to, and that's really what we wanted to get in front of you and make you aware of as a board, that if you're comfortable, we'd like this, we plan to go forward through these summer months to have these conversations. And I think we'll be able to glean something by the end of this summer that says, this is what we're envisioning based on all of this feedback. And hopefully at that point, it doesn't raise so many questions as it does now.
Do you anticipate that at that point, coming back and having this be an action item?
Yeah, because for several reasons, if it deals with a policy of UETNs, if it deals with the legislative ask for funding or for statutory changes, but it depends a lot on what our stakeholders envision us doing on their behalf. And so, yes, we
Okay.
anticipate an action item.
You haven't asked for it, but I'm going to go ahead. Members of the board, if you have particular interest in this, I would invite and encourage you to reach out to Spencer and Steve. This would be a great way for board engagement. And so whether you have comments or you would like to participate in more discussions, invite board members to do that. I appreciate, Steve, I appreciate your impassioned plea, and I think there is broad agreement on the responsibilities and what needs to happen. That's just from my point of view, let's just make sure that we are building it for success and building it to really accomplish what we know needs to happen. So thank you very much to
Chair?
both Spencer and Steve.
Yeah, Chair,
Yes.
one more thing. Can we just make a request that this comes back as an ongoing item each month, the updates surrounding this?
Each month
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you.
So
or each meeting?
So each meeting then, is that your request? Okay. Spencer? Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully by the next time we meet as a board.
So maybe we'll carve some time out during the retreat in September.
And there may be, if you don't mind, maybe an update via email in preparation for that September meeting.
Great.
This will be on the agenda for the CIO meeting. We're going to meet in retreat in Cedar City in July. So we'll put this on the agenda and make sure we have the input from the CIOs on how they feel about this.
Okay. Thank you. Great, helpful discussion. I'm going to move on to 3.3, which I think will also be a very good discussion. I think Laura will be leading this consortium software licensing.
I will. Thank you for that. Can everybody see the slide okay? Yeah, okay, great. So this is just a quick summary of, especially because we're at the end of the fiscal year, on where we stand with our consortium software purchases. So you can see from the diagram, we purchase on behalf of higher ed, K-12, and public libraries, as outlined in the statute that Patty shared with you. And this is a summary of the products that are currently under license. There's probably some that are missing and yeah, to be added later. So Patty shared with you some excerpts from state law. So in state law, we do have the authority and responsibility to develop a clearinghouse of these kinds of resources, including software, and make sure that it fulfills the needs that our constituents want it to. I think we all know educational software is more and more essential to the operation of schools, and you'll see that from some of the data that I'm going to share. So the board a few years ago did establish a written policy on how this software procurement takes place, and the process that it goes through, the criteria that we use to make decisions on if it's a consortium software or individual and so on. And there's a link to that in the materials that you have. You may recall this picture, the egg on a plate model, I like to call it, from our retreat last time. And so this is a really, I think, a nice way to show there are some software products that are core operation, that we consider them part of the infrastructure for higher ed and K-12, and those are the common good products. Canvas is probably the best example of that. It's software that's common for K-12 and higher ed, and really integral to operating schools these days. And so that's a piece of software that over the years we've gone to the legislature, and UETN now has ongoing funding to support that software for the institutions that we serve. Goodwill products are things that are also very important, but we may not have ongoing funding to support those. And there may be a majority of the LEAs or institutions that are using that software, but not all. And for those, we still negotiate a group license, so the participating institutions have a lower cost, and we run the RFP and we run all of the accounting, and then we bill back the institutions for their participation in those products. And then there's institution level things where it's the district or the institution's own budget, own local decisions and purchasing process. And we don't really have anything to do with that other than we're paying attention to when there's wide adoption of something where it might move from institution level to goodwill or from goodwill to common good. So for us in policy, it's at about 50% that we start to say, if 50% of the institutions are adopting this on their own, maybe it's something that we should work to equalize across the state, so it's fair for all of the institutions, and then have a better pricing because of the volume that's associated with that. So when I talk about the cyber infrastructure, these are the categories of software that we currently have under license. And some of these are represented by 2 or 3 different actual vendors, but these are the categories of things that really that our stakeholders have requested of us to run an RFP for that particular category of software. And then the way that it works is the people who would be the end users of that software serve on the evaluation committees, and they help to define the criteria that is being sought and to rate the vendors as they submit their RFPs, and ultimately to decide who the awards should go to. So it's really, I think, a good way that we're facilitating that consortium conversation and getting input from ultimately the people who will be using this software. So here's a little update on usage. You're all familiar with Canvas. On the left side of the slide is showing that higher ed usage of Canvas just continues to go up. And the average users per month is about 220 active users. Active users means they did more than log in. They were submitting an assignment or responding to a discussion. They were doing an action when they were using the software. For K-12, I think it's really interesting to see that, of course, there was a peak in 2021, but that usage of Canvas is still higher than it was pre-pandemic. So a lot of that has sustained, even though schools are back in session and having face-to-face instruction. When I look at the usage for all of the K-12 population, this usage represents about 58%, but when you look at the middle school, high school population, it's 122%, so it's oversaturated there. And we're seeing usage across all of the grades in Canvas. The other one, oh, yes.
Does that 122% represent students having more than one account?
No, it's just I took the quantity of students that exist in grades 7 through 12, so roughly 350,000 students. So it's not the actual students. It's not data based on the actual enrollments for those. It's just the number it's for comparative reasons. So the number of students that are grades 7 through 12 versus usage, if that makes sense.
There's more usage than there is students.
In those grades, yes.
Laura, you're facing vendor lock-in issues. I mean, when you have the whole state on this system, are they coming back and trying to jack up the price? How's the negotiations for the future going?
Yeah, well, you've helped to sign some of those, Steve. For these products, the negotiations have been going very well. So we just renewed the K-12 Canvas agreement. We have a new 5-year agreement. And very, very favorable pricing, I think, is what I could say in an open meeting like this. We license Canvas through the Internet 2 Consortium for higher education, and again, very favorable pricing. Those are both 5-year agreements, so it's something that we know is important for the faculty to be able to rely on because they're investing in building course material around this tool. So in this case, I think we have a very good relationship with this provider.
Great, thank you for your work on that.
Nearpod is another one that I wanted to bring up. So we saw a lot of this is mostly used in K-12, and we saw a lot of individual districts that were using this pre-pandemic. And with some of our CARES funding that we received at UETN, we were able to negotiate a 5-year license for Nearpod. Nearpod is a student interactive tool. We've used it a few times in the Education Advisory Council meeting. So some of you are, I think, are familiar with it in that way. The usage of this is just through the roof. You can see there have been over 21 million activity submissions. And what that means is questions, quizzes, or activities on the screen. Each one of those is a submission on an activity. Nearpod is used in every single one of the K-12 districts, and you see that represents over 900 schools. I actually did the math on these activity submissions because that's people essentially answering a question. And the trivia here is if every member of the legislature were to take the ACT test 946 times, that would be the equivalent of this number of activity submissions. So it's a lot. And this is one, it's great to see. It's also a little concerning because it was paid for one-time CARES money. So that's something I think that we need to work with you as a board to discuss what the plans are going forward. So overall cost savings, I also compared this to for each of our partners. So this isn't cumulative, but for each of our partners, the cost savings that they were able to achieve through this consortium purchasing is equivalent to the numbers that you see on the screen. So in other words, without this consortium discount, if the schools were to have the same amount of software, then these people's positions wouldn't be able to be filled, which I think is pretty important. So a summary for higher ed. We licensed 25 different products this year for higher ed. The total value of those was just over $4 million. And then you can see some of that is billed back. Some of it comes from state appropriation. And we overall had a 28% savings for higher ed. For K-12, the story is even better. 7 products were purchased for K-12, and we had a 47% savings overall. And then for the libraries, it's an 88% savings, 6 products, all the Utah's online library and research databases and tools, but significant savings on that one. So when you add all of those up, the total buy for this fiscal year was $26.5 million. $14.5 million of that was savings by doing a consortium purchase. And so our total cost was just over $12 million. And just to clarify, this isn't the list price so the non-consortium price, it's not the list price. When we have the vendors complete an RFP cost proposal, we request that they submit the cost if we weren't to do a full group buy. So what would the individual cost to each of our LEAs or institutions be? That's where we're getting the comparative number there. It's not the published list price that they may have on their website or something like that. We do have a pretty comprehensive website on UEN.org. And this is just a snapshot of what that website looks like. We have all of the pieces of software listed alphabetically. And these icons are clickable so the person can go and read more about that agreement and how it applies, who it applies to, how would they use it, how do they get training, where do they get more information. All of those things are linked on the website. And you'll see the red box that I put there is to highlight, there's some icons that show if it's for libraries, higher ed, or K-12. We did show this at the advisory council meeting last week, and one piece of feedback that we heard from them is to also, in addition to the alphabetical listing that we have now, to also group it by category. So put all of the plagiarism checker tools together, for example, or all of the research tools together. So it's easier to search that way as well. So that was some really valuable feedback that we'll be working with the web team on. So here's some other feedback that we heard. Sorry.
Yeah, Laura, is Turnitin keeping up with ChatGPT?
Well, we're just in the process of renewing that agreement, so that's what they're telling us, but our schools are testing it.
Okay. Some of my colleagues that I've talked to, 70% of the students wrote their term papers with ChatGPT.
I mean, unsurprisingly, the vendors are telling you that they all have the solution for that, but it is a rapidly moving target. So part of what we're asking though.
Okay.
These are some other recommendations that came from last week's Education Advisory Council meeting, and I just wanted to summarize them for you so that you get that feedback from the council. So we do have a flow chart on the website that describes this process, and the feedback from them was that it needs to be better. It's more granular steps so that it's something that is a process that's more easy to convey to other people, or to jump in and see where things are in the process. So something for us to work on. There was an idea to have an FAQ page, and the council and the people that we serve those questions would come from them. We did have some feedback also to work on the consortium part, which is every bit as important as just the contract and discounts, because we're really building a community of users around these products. So it's not just the license and then, it's an accounting project and then you go away. We have a full professional development staff, and we receive other benefits from just having a reduced cost by sharing training resources or being able to speak as a single voice to vendors about product enhancements or needs that we have for the product. So cost is great and the reduced cost is great, but this discussion was more on the relationship building with the constituents and end users, and especially where it crosses over higher ed and public ed. You saw the other one about grouping the products in other ways. And then just to simplify things even more, maybe a start here link if you were an administrator new in your position and just got sent to this website, just having some more guidance on how to work through that. So coming up for the new fiscal year.
Hey, Laura, I just wanted to jump and say I appreciated that last slide and what you just said. I've been a long advocate for the consortium efforts and the cost savings as a system that we have been able to have. That being said, I also appreciate the fact that as UETN helps negotiate these larger contracts, let the individual institutions continue to have an opportunity to have relationships with the different vendors. I know, for example, Utah State University, as we look now on this next slide, Zoom for higher ed, we've had particular success in reaching out and building relationships and being involved in some on the development side. So wanting to make sure that we benefit from the consortium model, but the individual institutions also benefit from the relationship building, because that can have a direct impact on product development and meeting needs within the educational area. And Laura, I know that you understand that. I just want to put a plug in and say that it's been helpful to have that balance. We have that balance on the Canvas side, which has always been good. I think that's a good example of where some individual institutions have been able to lean on Canvas, if you will, when it comes to future development, while at the same time being treated as a consortium too. So thank you.
Sure. And we're here to serve the institutions. I'm glad that you said that. And we really rely on the end users, and especially the people that do faculty support or that work in the district IT shop or curriculum. They're really the people that are on the ground that see this software being used. And so a lot of times we can arrange for trial periods to be able to get a little deeper dive into how the products work, or just building community around that. We're being able to convene the right people and have these conversations is beneficial, I think, for everybody across the state. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, just as we go into new licensing, I think being aware that some institutions or some groups may want to have that one-on-one communication with the group, and having that having the ability for the institution. So Zoom, again, I'm going back to Zoom as an example. If that moves to a consortium license, that would be great. I think we would realize some cost savings there, but wanting to make sure that the different institutions don't lose the individual relationships that they have and the product development that is going on, I think would be helpful too. So messaging that to Zoom as a company and saying, okay, UETN is UETN is negotiating on behalf of the consortium, but the institutions still have a voice too.
Thank you. Yeah.
Chair.
So Zoom is one. This is just my last slide, and then I think Patty had a question.
Yeah.
Just to
Yes.
give you a future peek at these are the requests that we've heard and we have lined up for the coming fiscal year. So some of these we know are high demand and are funded with one-time money, Adobe and Scribble. Nearpod I mentioned. And then we've had requests for some of these other categories that we do an RFP or at least do some research on these things. And then the other one to mention is the research library. So we are at the end of a 10-year license period for the research library tools. And there's a large RFP committee representing academic libraries, public libraries, and K-12 that are starting to put together an RFP that will be for the next 8 months. So that's the last slide that I have. So if you have questions.
Chair, I have a couple of questions. First of all, thank you so much, Laura, for the presentation. I think that everyone, board, staff, everyone in looking at that cost savings really is something to be proud of, being fiscally responsible for the taxpayer dollars and, you know, that consortium pricing. So just thank you to you, your team, everyone that makes that possible, because I think that is super important going all the way around. I just had a couple of questions, and one of them was on, I have 3 questions. One of them was on, I think, the slide before the last slide when you were putting together that flow chart, and you don't have to go back to it, but I'm wondering if we can come up with a standard protocol, some sort of a standard operating procedure, an SOP, about how we do those types of procedures. You know, what is the purpose, the deadlines, the process materials, who's responsible, those types of things for full transparency and risk management. So yeah, going back here. So if anyone at any time can go back through, and I know most institutions have some sort of an SOP, standard operating procedures, where they say, here's what we do for this process, and then here's this process, so that at any point someone can come in and see that. So I'm just wondering if there could be some sort of a template created that then whenever we have these processes in place, it could become a standard operating procedure and be very transparent to the public as well. That's my first one. So I don't know if you have any comments on that.
You're on mute, Laura.
I hate that. If that's helpful.
The idea, Laura? You hate the idea?
No, I hate when I'm talking on mute.
Just kidding, yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that I would really think we'd rely on the advisory council to help with, because this flow chart is what's currently on the website as part of the process. But the feedback that they provided is the same thing that you've said. It needs to be more detailed. And especially for people that don't do purchasing all the time and aren't familiar with it. So yeah, definitely something we'd want to get input from the council on too.
Yeah, and it's good that Elwood's on here too, just as we're moving forward in this, maybe as a seed, a kernel to be thinking about looking at an approved template going forward, so that we have all that information and don't leave any out. The second one, going back to the egg on a plate, which I love that analogy. If we go back to the egg on the plate, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions on here, because it kind of relates to the statute that I was talking about earlier. When we look at the statute and it talks about, let me get to it myself. Let's see. When it says on there that UETN will, and it just says apply, and I put it in the chat, apply for state and federal funding on behalf of public and higher education and telehealth services. And then there's no guardrails around that. So moving forward, does it look like, and I know you had a great and amazing conversation with Rick, and you're starting to look at some of those things at K-12. Just for everyone's sake, we've had a conversation with Laura and Spencer, and I think Laura had then one with Rick, correct? Okay, good. And with having K-12 advocate for some of its, for I think I'm not sure where all of that landed, software funding moving forward. And then what does it say in statute and the statutory requirements of UETN? And that if it really is that each entity advocates on its own for those, then we need to maybe clear that up in statute so that our legislators don't get confused, because we don't want our legislators thinking, well, then why are you asking for it? Because shouldn't so-and-so, should UETN be asking for this? Does it go through this committee? Does it go for that committee? What does that look like? Less misconceptions and more clarity for our legislators is always good, as they get a million things thrown at them at one time. And so if we were to look at this, and maybe this is a conversation and an action item moving forward, as I know you and Rick talked, but does it look like institution level products are something that UETN advocates for funding? And then does it look like goodwill is a maybe? And then how is that decided? And then common goods are left up to the LEAs to decide. What does that look like in the decision-making process, as we talked about it the other day? Is I didn't have this great graphic.
Sure. Thank you for that. And of course, the decisions about the funding requests that go to the legislature lie with the board. So to clarify, I think it's the opposite of what you said. The common good are really the core instructional products. So Canvas is an example. Things that everybody uses, it's kind of universal. And there's so much saturation and discount available that's something in the past we've gone to the legislature for and requested. The goodwill are the ones that there's a lot of usage. More than 50% of the institutions are using it. And if usage continues to increase and it makes sense financially, then it probably would move to be one of the core products. And just looking at the data, I think Nearpod is in that category. And then institution level is really each school's individual budget, their local decisions, and they do their own purchasing. It's just to acknowledge that there are other pieces of software that are out there that are purchased locally. So with all of these, I think it's continuing to look at the data, listening to our stakeholders about what the priorities are. And where we've been the most successful in the past with these kind of legislative requests is we've made the request. So for example, with Canvas, it was a UETN request for both higher ed and public ed, but to have USBE endorse that and support it and be vocal about advocating for it. And the same for higher ed, when we sought additional funding for Canvas for higher ed, to have that board and the system in their committee just talk about that they're supporting that part of UEN's request. I think that just being all on the same page with that just is much more powerful.
And does the 50%, Chair, may I follow up? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay, and does the 50% come from the tech inventory that goes out? Is that where you get the 50% from?
It's not actually. The 50% is because we make the contracts available, and then we have a participation agreement with every LEA that wants to opt in. So we can tell, we have a list of all the schools, we can tell who's using that product and who isn't and what their usage is. And then we can do the math to see the products that they're individually paying for, like derivative math, for example, or Nearpod has some add-on products like Vocabulary that teaches English language arts. Is there enough saturation that it is more cost effective to include that as part of the core? And we can see which schools have opted into those particular products and what they've paid for it.
Okay, and one more follow-up, and then I'll turn it back to, sorry. And the other follow-up would be, we as UETN, USBE, so my full-time job, we have to start doing our legislative funding cases right now. And that's how our time frame works. And I'm just wondering when we'll know which products will or won't be in the category for UETN to advocate for, and which ones we need to advocate for and put in that, because they have to be approved by our board. So it kind of is like this 2-3 month cycle before it's approved and then goes, and then we create that, request to the legislature. So we're in that path already. I'm just wondering what the timeline would look like so that every entity is aware of what they need to advocate for on their own, and then what UETN is going to advocate for.
Yeah, I have the information for you about what's coming up for expiration and what I think would be in that common good category. And then the other ones that we know that are already being used but are funded with one-time money, like Adobe, for example, and we would much prefer to have on ongoing funding. So I do have a list of those for you, and Spencer and I were just going to go over it this afternoon and send it over to you. But ultimately, what makes the list for our request would be a board decision, and we usually work on that during the retreat. So if that timing needs to change, that would probably be helpful to know.
We are going to need it sooner than that if possible, but I don't know the other entities. We have telehealth, we have, higher ed. We have our libraries on here as well. So I don't know what their type of timelines are for doing legislative requests as well. So I don't know if it's just us that are in this time crunch.
Okay, other questions for Laura? Well, Laura, thank you very much. Appreciate the excellent work and the ongoing efforts. Sounds like there will be more information to share. Great. We'll move on to our reports now, and looking at the time, we'll try to keep these reports to 5 minutes or less for each. I know every time I say that, it hurts because I know how much work is being done at the advisory council level and by our executive director. So I apologize about the shortness of the time, but let's go to our executive director report first.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to keep this to just a few minutes. Just one update and then a few, I guess, recognitions. At the last meeting, I had given a brief introduction to a planning grant that we'd received from the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity in relation to the Broadband Equity and Access Deployment Program, which we affectionately call BEAD. And I just wanted to give an update on where that's at. Just to remind everybody, what we're attempting to do is find a way in which we can get a more granular understanding of where gaps exist in relation to broadband connectivity. This picture is kind of representative of the concept that we're going after. This isn't, those green dots are not real data, but this does compare what in the blue is what the FCC shows in terms of broadband coverage as reported by providers and then sent by the states. The one below is data maintained by the Utah Geographic Reference Center in partnership with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. And it gives a little more graphic or granular representation of where gaps do exist. The intent here is that it helps us get a more meaningful conversation going across the enterprise, if you will, with LEAs, with providers, and with UETN and with the broadband office on where opportunities exist, at least for purposes of education connectivity. This grant is a way to prove out this concept, and we're working with the Utah Geographic Reference Center to see if we can test out this idea with some student address information, of course de-identified, but in a way to at least convey this concept in a way to start a conversation where gaps ultimately exist. I feel like it's something important to bring up because it speaks to specifically the equity gaps that are out there, and it's the mission of UETN to get to the bottom of that, if you will. But it also illustrates some of the inherent challenges in the data related to broadband connectivity. I noticed Rebecca Dilg's on here. She just came off a very busy week with what was called a broadband confluence. Just in that meeting, we had some very good conversations with UDOT partners, as well as Sarah Young at USBE, and partnering together in this effort to hopefully identify these gaps. Just a couple kudos. I want to call out specifically Matt Winters. A lot of you know who Matt is. He's been recognized by the International Society for Technology and Education. This is a very large organization for those of you that are familiar with it. I'm just learning about this group. But to give you an idea of what 20 people means to be recognized, the 20 people to be recognized by this organization, he'll be recognized at a conference later this month that'll be attended by over 15,000 people, excuse me, in Philadelphia. And so it's a fairly significant recognition for what Matt does. I just wanted to highlight a quick example of some of his work in the last year at Granite School District. They increased the number of their Google certified teachers from 4 to 60. That's great in and of itself, but I think what's cool is we've also got some data in terms of what they've done in improving the instruction to students. So Hillsdale Elementary, this is getting down to the very ground floor, but Hillsdale Elementary had a goal of achieving 40% of students English proficiency, hitting English proficiency standards and assessments. Teachers who worked with their tech coach in getting that Google certification, one teacher got 49% proficiency, another one 75%, another one 77%, another one 65%. What I think is needed, it shows the outcomes that come from some of these certifications that we have people training teachers on. So I just wanted to highlight Matt. He does a great job. Many of you know him. He was the MC for the USEC conference a few months ago, but a very important recognition. One other thing I wanted to note on our network. This is something that's been in the work for a few years by our procurement folks, but they've progressively achieved significant cost savings related to our network backbone, and most of that is kicking in this current fiscal year. And you can see the numbers there, but a significant reduction in cost. This is due to the strong relationships that UETN has with its providers. It's a very symbiotic relationship in which we both benefit. And it really is a tribute to the model that UETN is that enables us to do these kinds of things. A real quick note, in the past 6 months, 8 months, we've tried to work more towards engaging students and giving them opportunities in the things that we do at UETN. So I just wanted to note real quickly, we have now 2 high school interns and 3 college interns participating in our instructional services area. And one of the cool things they'll be doing is this program called Student in Focus, where they'll be collecting PSAs from student-produced materials throughout public education. It's just starting, but we hope it'll be something that creates a platform for student-produced material to be broadcast and published through statewide platforms that UETN has. And then just a quick note, next week is UETN's Tech Summit. This is one of what I would say one of the 3 big conferences that we either host or support. This is particular to the technology directors and tech leadership in public and higher education. Of course, any board member is more than welcome to participate and attend if you have any interest. And that's my report, Chair. Happy to take questions or discussion.
Great. Any questions for our executive director? Congratulations on those. That is great. Great work. We'll now move to our advisory councils. We'll first hear from Telehealth, then our UEN Advisory Council, and then lastly our Technology Advisory Council. So Telehealth.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep it brief. We had a great meeting last week. As was mentioned, he was recommended to the board. That motion passed, so we're grateful for that. We have one more vacant spot coming up that we need to fill. That's for a rural representative. Eric Packer, who's the CEO of the Cedar City Hospital. His term is ending and we'll be looking for a new representative. Also at the Tech Summit next week, as Spencer mentioned, we will be presenting the 2023 Deborah LaMarche Telehealth Excellence Award. And the Advisory Council took on the role this year of scoring all of the 9 nominations that we received and helping us decide on the winner. So the winner has been notified and they will be at the Tech Summit on the first day to receive that award. So we're excited about that. It was focused on behavioral health this year, telebehavioral health, and improving access to behavioral health services using technology. And then Nikki Parasho, who's the director of our NRTRC grant, provided a really great presentation and overview of the policy and billing changes that are happening in telehealth because of the end of the public health emergency. If you may know, the official end of the COVID public health emergency was on May 11th. And that brought about some changes to the way providers are able to bill and be reimbursed for telehealth. And so we're staying on top of what those changes mean for patients and providers. And we are starting to plan and prepare for our next annual telehealth conference. It'll be in Seattle next year at the end of May, end of April, 1st of May. And so we're looking forward to another great conference. And I think I will end there. Thank you.
Great. Any questions for our Telehealth Advisory Council? Okay, appreciate your efforts. Thank you. We'll move on to the UEN Advisory Council. Rick.
Thank you, Chair. I will also be brief because we've already covered pretty much everything that we talked about. So we are very much in alignment with today's meeting. Highlights, I think there were 3 highlights from our meeting a week ago. First was opportunity for the Advisory Council to also meet Elwood. And I took the opportunity to have them all introduce themselves to Elwood, the representative group that they represent, and also just some of how UEN helps to serve them. I think it was enlightening, again, as always, to be able to hear of all the ways that UEN touches entities across the state and educators and in so many different areas. And but I think it also helped Elwood get a better understanding of just what UEN is and how unique UETN is as an organization. We also had a presentation from Katie Garrett that Spencer just highlighted a little bit with the student interns and with the student media services and some of the things that they have been in student media programs that they've been doing. It was really inspiring, the work that they have been doing, and just kudos to Katie and to UEN Media Services for the work that they are doing in this area. And that I think it would also be of value at some point in the future to have Katie share some of that work to the board. It really was impressive. And then our conversation that the board just engaged in on consortium media, consortium software licensing was something that we also discussed, and you saw some of the recommendations from the advisory council. But those are the main highlights of the UEN Advisory Council, and share those with you at this time and take any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you, Rick. Any questions, comments? Thank you for all of the work of the UEN Advisory Council. Now with the Technology Advisory Council, we're not sure if Greg's in a position right now to share an update. Greg, are you able to? Okay, we'd heard that he might be in a meeting. So Jim, I'm wondering if you could provide an update on the Technology Advisory Council.
Happy to do so. I'll be very brief. We were able to meet with Elwood, and he said in our discussion, we had a long list, and we do have a long list of things that we would like to be able to talk about. The first one on the list was security, and that meant that was really the only thing we got to in our last discussion. But I will note that part of Spencer's report and a discussion about security and having a security center was really given to us by our council and our committee, and asked us to bring that forward. So we'll continue to have those discussions, and we appreciate Greg's leadership there, and we do appreciate anyone that would like to join us. It is always a very technical discussion, so not everybody's cup of tea.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions, comments from the board? Okay, appreciate those reports and updates. Draw attention to members of the board in your materials. There are some recent media productions. I always love these and appreciate the UETN team, including those in our materials. Lastly, I'll draw to board members' attention that our next meeting will indeed be our all-day retreat. So I hope that you have that on your calendar, September 22nd. We will give you further information. Most likely that will be in Salt Lake Valley. Will be the expectation, at least. So we will work on a location and get that out to you soon. But please block out the whole day on your calendar, and then appreciate Denise putting in the notes the rest of the meetings for the remainder of the year. If you remember, we kind of adjusted and went without an August meeting. So that means that we'll meet in September with then a back-to-back meeting in October and November. We'll be moving towards the legislative session at that point. No doubt some business items will need to take place in those meetings. So hope that board members have them on your calendars. Anything else that needs to be brought before the board? Looks like Rick. Is that a hand?
Yeah, just a quick question to the advisory council and the retreat. It would be good to be able to let them know if they need to block out the whole day or half a day sooner than later.
That's a great point. We will take that into advisement. Not quite sure we're ready to give an answer yet, but that's a very, very good point. We need to let them know. So we will discuss. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Well, I would like to thank members of the board for participating this morning, and thank members of the team, the UETN team, for being here and leading some great discussions. Thank you again to Elwood for joining us. With that, hope that you all have a wonderful rest of the day and weekend, and I will entertain a motion to close this meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day and see you in September.